feelers, because I have a lot of Web 3.0 questions today. What is Web 3.0? You should ask me, Nitin, if I knew it, I would be sitting here. I would be doing Web 3.0. What is Web 3.0? Coming from a gaming guy who's living in this, supposed to be living in this world.
In a very, very simplistic language, can I say that it's a decentralized place where computers can now interact as humans with the content to create better content for the users?
That's good. I like that. So I'm going to challenge you on that, and only because, don't get it the wrong way, it's just how we're supposed to. So have you heard of GPT-3? So GPT-3 is generative modeling technique which allows, so these are bots which are writing articles and filing patents and creating human avatars who look like humans. They can participate in this too as humans, but they're not humans. So just keep that in mind, because we will come back to this, because there's a certain level of accountability. And remember, we're building a participative economic system from Web 3.0, which means there's a sense of trade, trust, and ownership. So if these bots are trading, then what does it mean? But in essence, it relies a lot on automation, but you still have to deal with who's channeling the energy and compute power to do the right things. Because I think that the Web 2.0, which we'll discuss, has expanded a lot, but Web 3.0 will exponentially grow the compute requirements that we have for the Web 3.0 world. So keep that in mind, because I think you're a step ahead in saying that while this work we're building, for them to have a real-time analysis for fraud, for your visibility, you need to have a much more robust system like AI, machine learning system, to give you that information in real time. Yeah, because you have the AI slant as you've asked questions over time, so I think you're AI focused. So that's good, Rashi. What about you?
It's more about data secrecy. So, looking at the evolution from Web 1.0, 2.0, where the data or the web was basically dynamic, static, then became dynamic, and it all became social platform or social working place, where the control was with some of the key giants like Google, Amazon, Microsoft. So now I think it's a much more shift towards data secrecy and the freedom of sharing information.
So if I create a platform which gives you all that, it gives you ownership of your data, which technically we're supposed to have, like if you get off Facebook, which I did a while back, and a happy person I am today than I was not, but let's say you did, and your data goes with you, because you node a network and then it goes away. Or let's say I create a centralized platform that lets you do all these things. Can that be classified as Web 3.0? Why not? You mentioned that there are 2 or 3 different characteristics and criteria that makes a Web 2.0 model Web 3.0. No, so is everything else. Every software that you're using is open source. Somebody's commercialized it, but most software is open source. All your Web 2.0 technology is open source. In fact, all the Apache projects, Apache licensing, are all open source projects. Linux is open source. Somebody's commercialized it because you want support and you want features and everything else, but it's all open source. So I get what you're saying, the open source is required, but open source does not define. I think Web 3.0 it's a complete shift of mindset in general. But let me go back to the question, is if I were to give you all the requirement that you had, does it still make it Web 3.0? Data privacy, data ownership? That's right. So we have to ask what makes Web 2.0 Web 3.0. And so we'll go through that journey here. And that's a good segue into, anybody else want to chime in? Shreyas? Liquidity is not the answer. And decentralization is one facet of it, because also answer to everything in crypto world is decentralization, which is like, oh, it's decentralized project. Like, it doesn't really matter because, your thoughts on Web 3.0? And your thoughts on Web 3.0? Okay.
I don't really think it's decentralization.
Good. I'm glad someone said that. What the hell is going on here?
But I feel like the only true Web3 application that I've used is Metamask.
Is
Metamask.
really?
How is Metamask to Web3?
I know. Metamask is the joke of. I mean, I'm being recorded here. It's. I mean, have you read Moxie Marlinspike's write-up? He's the founder of Signal. So he talked about the fact that what Metamask really does. So if you look at the centralization of consensus, which is the Infura, these all are centralized systems. They're embarking on decentralized structures, but they all are centralized systems. You want to have Metamask institutional, they're running on infrastructure, they're running on Infura. Codify is all part of the consensus ecosystem. Consensus goes, so does your Metamask.
No, but at least like in terms of usability, like they never asked me for any sort of verification, and like the wallet's got.
And you think they don't know?
See, that's the thing. Like right now, like
Come on.
just as the Gaur had said, right? Like the decentralization aspect, like honestly, is not coming through in a lot of places. Like almost every single person here who owns any sort of cryptocurrency is owning it on centralized exchange as well.
Yeah.
Right. So like Metamask was the only first time when I actually felt like I was putting money into something.
No, but I mean, you had, this is to me, I'm really surprised because if you look at the traditional wallets, the non-custodial wallets, Zappo, which is acquired by Coinbase, they were, I did experiments back in the day. I didn't need it. Like I had Bitcoin wallets on my laptop. Of course, that's a whole different story. I swapped my laptop and I lost a bunch of stuff in that. And there are many such stories in the world where those were truly decentralized. Like Zappo was, it's a wallet and no one had control but you, which means there's an accountability, there's a responsibility. So, and I don't necessarily say, I mean, you have a seed phrase on your, and you open a new device and you install Metamask and you put the seed phrase. Where the hell do you think that information is coming from? Where do you think it's kept? If all you need is a seed phrase to restore your assets in your wallet without actually having access to private keys, where the hell do you think that's stored?
But still, the seed phrase doesn't recognize me as shares, right?
So does it mean that we don't have to recognize humans and just call it Web 3.0? I'm engaging in a debate. So I'm not targeting you or anything. I'm just saying. So my point is, what makes Web 2 or Web 3.0? So you had a question. You had a comment. Not decentralization. I accept that not everything has to be decentralized. We shouldn't be drinking the decentralization Kool-Aid. It is a property of a system that has its advantages, but not everything in the world has to be decentralized.
It's more around semantics and studying metadata and customizing and interacting with the web. More than it being one way, it is more about building an interactive web and more of a community sort of thing.
But interactive web is already there.
Interactive web more in terms of studying the metadata and behavior of individuals.
That we do that already. Mass customization is exactly what Facebook and Google do. They know who the hell you are. They know that's studying metadata. So the Google traffic is studying metadata.
Right now, it's studying your behavior to predict your behavior. Like they're using existing data to build data. They're not exactly using intelligence.
If I can only interrupt in between, we have been doing something like this for years now. It's not something new. We have already been doing this thing already. Web 3.0 is actually, what you're saying is actually a part of Web 3.0, but does not consider it as a.
That's what I don't believe is decentralization.
Yeah. So two things on this, right? And the reason why this this dialogue is important is because we have an understanding of Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and our thinking comes from Web 3, from what Web 3.0 should be. So we had internet as internet of information, network of information, based on information theory, which is where the binary comes into play. And that meant that anything that's on the internet is cut and pasteable. I can replicate stuff. And one advantage of what Bitcoin showed us, and Bitcoin is as we all know, the primary sort of paper and the project that opened this whole can of worms to where, including Web 3.0. So blockchain is a Web 3.0 technology. Blockchain is not Web 3.0. Right, and your question, and the reason I keep asking you Web 3, because IPFS is a big part of that too, is internet was for network of information, is ability for us to move information seamlessly. It was great for a bunch of other things. But we are now getting into information of value, or internet of value, sorry. And internet of value is ability to move value as easily as we move information, whether it's structured information in form of news or in emails or any of the other communication mechanisms, tweets, whatever that may be, it's all information that leading to disinformation, which means people, GPT, for example, can tweak your video and make it look like, we've seen a lot of that stuff in terms of fake media.
Just for example, the Shah Rukh Khan's video.
I have no idea what that is, but.
So it's basically an advertisement where he's pursuing.
Oh, yeah, that one. I saw that on, which is, you can have which company is that? Cadbury's. That's right. So I saw that. That was brilliant because they basically gave a small business a chance on this platform to be able to have their business be advertised in the region or some sort. They can customize it and depending on how they want to utilize it in that region.
Basically pursuing customers who buy stuff in the festive season from the nearby.
Yeah. And the question then becomes is, and Google keyword, Square, PayPal, they all had worked for merchant to provide. In fact, she's not here, but the Amex merchant services went down the path to say instead of you advertising and paying for market dollars, if all I can do, this is the solo-mo, the social mobile location movement we had a decade ago when mobile devices were like on their exponential rise, is the fact that you don't have to pay for all this stuff. Let Google, Square, and all these people bring the customer to you, and you pay a combined total of 6 to 7%, which is much higher than interchange fee or credit card fee, to give you a much more value-add service. And that was successful in many cases. Google made majority of the money on keyword searches, which is basically in the Web 2.0 era, or the Web 1.0 era, where all they did was they connected you and you clicked the button and they were able to track the click-through service. And they said that, hey, you have made purchase of $1,000 and Google made it happen online, so we need to get a commission of that. And they were successfully able for the longest time. They had $1 billion businesses and multiple $1 billion businesses based on that. Things changed when mobile came into existence, because now you have physicality. Now I'm walking around and I'm not looking at Google all the time, and then Yelp and some of the other entities came into play. And so the question was, in all of this evolution that we did, we were dealing with purely information. We're dealing with a transaction that could happen either online or offline, and how do we, so the biggest issue that you had with the evolutionary process of Web 1.0, Web 2.0 was, how do we get a piece of that action? How do we get a piece of that action where allows us to say, you made so much purchases and I need a commission of this piece. And I spent AI, did correlation between all your social media profiles, your location based, and I got more and more intelligent. But at the end of the day, it's just still information. And worst is that not only you had no control on your information, you had no control on your insight and what people did with that information, which led to the crisis we're in right now, which is information dissemination or disinformation, or dissemination crisis. So Web 3.0 to me is about that. We learned about tokenization, we learned about blockchain, we learned about all these other elements, but at a broad level, and by the way, there's no standardized definition of Web 3.0. This is how we're pursuing this in the industry, is when we looked at Web 1.0, and all of you may be way too young, and I was in college, and we were like, hey, go to this website, and we go to www type. We had to remember websites, and this is post-DNS era. Many of you know what DNS is? I'm going to ask this question because, oh my God, DNS. No one knows what DNS is. Man, this is, what?
Domain name.
Yes.
Domain name server.
Oh my God, this is just, now this is generation gap here. So DNS is the heart of everything we do, right? DNS and TCP and IP networks that we are building. Basically, no one wants to memorize these octet numbers, right? Now it's 16, earlier it was like, 4 octets, now we have 16 octets. So domain name servers came into play, which basically is, when you type in www or bit.ly, which is a shortened version of the whole thing, it points you to a server that hosts that content. Now, interesting things can happen with it. So with Web 1.0, DNS came out. We were able to do CNN.com and like, oh, look, you have all this information. Consume information, pick up a phone and call them, because there's no other way to interact with them. Web 2.0 came about and say, I can now shop. And it didn't happen by accident. I'm giving you the history because it's important for you to understand where we're going from here. We had TLS, we had HTTPS, you had the security protocol that gave the freedom to first retailers to say, at least I know where you're coming from. If you build login information, everything else, I can create an account for you, I can ship you, I can take your credit cards. Even credit card information at the time was transmitted through information networks. We gave all the card numbers, which is what you do today and everything else. All based on information, and it was basically allowing to say, instead of CNN collecting information, typing it up and uploading a website, why don't we give power to you to go and upload the content, which is where Facebook and Google came into existence, to say, you have a device, run my software on it, and I can track you, I can do everything with your content, with your data. You are giving all kind of information on traffic information, and more and more people using Google traffic helps them build a better algorithm and better everything else. We benefit from it too. But it is basically giving control to you for all the interaction. Like you said, we've been doing this for quite some time. And that led to all the centralized platforms monetizing this, which means that you have absolutely no control on all the Facebook posts that you've had, all the Instagram, all the LinkedIn posts, and what you do with it. So that is Web 2.0. Now we're looking at, and you use the word semantics, but to me it's like this. It's, and this little gray area, because the technology that we're building Web 3.0 on is still internet, which was designed for information dissemination. And we should dive a bit deeper into it, because it's a whole new stack. There's at least $40 to $100 billion a year spent on building parallel stacks to fuel Web 3.0. Web 3.0, in my opinion, cannot exist or thrive on existing TCP/IP stack. And there's a lot of proof in that whole thing. There's academic community, there's computer scientists who sort of vehemently agree on this part. But the idea is that we are using the ability for the network effect that Internet Protocol enabled us to do. We are using the ability for some facet of ownership. So remember, trade trust ownership are some of the components of blockchain. And blockchain is one of the technology that fuels the Web 3.0 element. And blockchain, remember, we talked about a database, database cryptography, smart contract, and consensus, is some mechanism for all to agree upon a few things. Right, and I'll give you some concrete examples in a few minutes. And we are basically we're building a participative economy for people to participate, which means you're not just a passive consumer of information or passive creator of content or meaningless content in some cases. You stand behind what you own, good, bad, ugly, whatever that may be. So building a participative system, you're participating in some form or fashion. So if you're not an actor who is producing and earning from the system, you're an actor who is participating but paying in the system. So there's no free lunch anymore. Because right now you are all having free lunch at the cost of your data, at the cost of all that you're doing, and somebody else is profiting from it, and it's creating an imbalance in the entire system. And I think internet, we've seen that with Facebook, we've seen that with many of the other conglomerates where they have misused our data, and we have now seen issues with, again, election frauds and everything else that goes with it. Right. So the question then becomes, is read, write, own. So I made a conscious decision 3 years back to not read content from what I'm not paying for. And I'm doing this because I'm in the industry, I'm reading a lot about it, to say I will only read information. So I'm not on any of the social media except LinkedIn, because it lets me connect. And so even LinkedIn is participative. I'm only reading what my network posts, because we have like interest. And I have filtered out all the messy content that I don't really care about. And so second thing is that I'm reading from 3 or 4 news media outlets that I trust, that I'm paying for, which means it's a choice that I make. And again, no free lunch. I'm paying for it, so I'm consuming it because I'm paying for it. I'm not going for any other free media, because at some point they need my attention, whether it's ad revenue or tracking or tracing or some other, the other element. What makes all this possible is the tokenized asset form. So all the things that we discussed is ability for me to tokenize information, tokenize identity. We talked about that in the morning. Tokenizing your healthcare records, tokenizing. So we looked into working with Reuters. So how does news get distorted? Or how do we introduce the AI-driven misinformation, or as you may have seen in our elections, that they slowed down a video, making a person look like a retard. There's some politician who slowed down the video drastically to feel like, okay, they're not mentally sane to stand elections, to sway that opinion. And what we're looking at from information perspective is, if I'm consuming information, do I have enough provenance? Remember the history of this. Who is the original? So Associated Press creates content, and all the media then takes that content and has the editorial perspective on that content. So you're consuming opinions too. It's not just straight news. So what Associated Press, who's funded by the entities will go on the field and they report what they have seen, like without any this thing. And the CNNs of the world and Times of India of the world takes that and provide their own masala, so to speak, on top of that, and they disseminate that information. So the question that happens at that point is, do I have a choice? Do I have an ability to look at the provenance of who has distorted this image from the original image? Today we don't. But imagine if you're consuming news in future, you have provenance of who's changed the content, who's made the changes, and then you can choose to say, I really want to see the original content and not the sixth layer down. And blockchain does that at a conceptual level, and the question then becomes, who pays for this? Which means that you need to have, just like Ether and Bitcoin, some mechanism to, because you got this whole ecosystem has to be fed. So now you value truth. You value your privacy, and you value some of the other elements that make sense for them to get into this whole game. So Web 3.0 is all about, of course, doing this, but having an ownership in form of a content, in form of some participation, in form of monetizing the content, but also in terms of making sure that you're doing it rewriting, but you're actually supporting that ecosystem. So how do we do that? I'm going to pause here. Question so far, does it make sense? Is it too abstract? Go for it.
So some components of Web3 were like a DAO, for example. Again, a DAO will be controlled by the people who have the most assets, right? So again, essentially, we're moving towards Web 2.0.
True. So that to me is a transition, right? Which means that if you want to go to complete, so there's a journey in this. Decentralization not the answer, but you cannot simply switch this. So if you look at, how many of you want to make a die? If you want to make a die, somebody mentioned die. You mentioned die. So if you look at Maker project was basically a centralized project. So the founders had an idea, they built the idea, became one of the most successful stablecoins and lending platforms or collateralized debt position platforms. And just about a few months back, the CEO resigned, and it's completely a decentralized project now. So sometimes some projects needs, whether it's regulation, whether it's maturity, they need some shepherding, and that should be built into your tokenomics, by the way. Is at some point you need to be decentralized because you don't have to be, but you can be from that perspective. And so DAO is a construct. This is nothing but a smart contract which takes advantage of the programmability that Ethereum has to offer, or any of the smart contract platforms have to offer. But in many cases, you start with centralization. So any project start with, at the end of the day, if you have humans involved, unless we go down to the GPT-3 route, humans are involved, you're accountable for every line of code you write every time. But the process of transitioning from launching a project and eventually going towards letting it loose on its own because you have the right controls, right governance mechanisms, and right tokenomics built into it, then it becomes a truly sort of Web 3.0 model. Even if you have your own centralized project, to Bhavia's point, you don't have to be decentralized. Are you fueling the ownership sense that if I'm creating content, and if you look at some of the newer crypto Twitter models, where crypto, does anybody know the name of that? There's a Twitter-like stuff you can plug into your profile. It creates a token of you, and depending on your network and whatever it analyzes, gives your profile a value. What's your value in this? No, not minting NFTs. It was so many projects, hard to remember the names. But there's a project which basically ties into your Twitter account and looks at your entire network and gives your Twitter handle a value based on your quality of this thing. And that is one example where I can still be centralized. I can fuel a mechanism for you to earn, spend, and do things because you have complete ownership of your data. So in case of what we were discussing with Rashi earlier on, that if you're in a healthcare system and you bring your ID and you have healthcare data, well, you own it. And it can be a centralized platform. Like in the US, you have 3 companies that own $1 trillion worth of problem at the moment. But if I go to California from Texas, for example, I cannot take that data to Texas. I have to do all those tests all over again. And if I have my own data, I can just go and give a temporary ownership to the doctor who can add the prognosis, which adds the entire stream of the longitudinal data set. And then it's still mine. They sign it and it comes back to me. No one actually has ownership of that data. That to me will be a Web 3.0 application.
So how am I thinking is basically Web 3 is a concept.
Yeah.
It's a concept. Because Facebook can also move through this idea of providing creators the power of the original.
Sure, they can. It breaks the business model though. Facebook is free. You're the product, right? And they sell your profile to advertisers and they find your location. They find it a more effective platform for you to entice you to buy things that you've been looking for. So if they were to give you the option of monetizing your data, then you become the customer. So you completely reverse the business model. So this is a business model challenge, my friends. It's not a technology issue. You're changing the way we view our control on our data, our web, and subsequently insights, which means if you choose to have complete opacity of information, your AI modules don't do jack. I cannot run AI model because you own the data. So how do I create profile? How do you create your persona, your data sets? Because you have not given me control. So suddenly now, all the Web 2.0 companies who are running this massive amount of algorithms and AI structures for all the open data that you have on their platform, suddenly they get disintermediated. They need your permission to use your data, which is how it should be. So you're completely turning this whole thing around, that now you're in control of your data. You're monetizing. You're telling Google, I'll do it. What am I getting out of it? And Google can say, I'll connect you with your insurance company. Insurance company says, you know what, I'll pay you, or I'll give you a discount for accessing your data. Suddenly now you're in control and you are going back to the ability for me to earn from your lifestyle, your data, whatever is in value at the moment. And that's why maybe Rashi's healthcare record is less valuable than somebody who has a chronic illness for decades.
Do people require this much control?
Yes, that's what Web3 should be all about, is giving you the control on ownership economy.
You require it.
It's not. It's not a Web3 point, but iOS recently built that with Facebook, right? Saying
It's not a Web 3.0, but iOS, it's not a Web 3.0, but the thing is, they're doing all this as a patchwork. So they have changed the model of obfuscating your data without your permission. It does not change the business model. You're still not making anything out of it.
yeah, still not making, but that was a step towards that.
So the point is if Facebook doesn't collect the data because of privacy features, no, I know, but Apple has turned the feature on, so Facebook doesn't collect the data because you have turned it off. And any other location services that you have the control now, they've given you the control, but you still don't have your data, right? So not only we are dealing with decentralization of compute, interconnect, and storage at a technical level, which is what blockchain does, or decentralized blockchain infrastructures do, but you're also dealing with storage. So NFTs, all the digital marketing dudes and gaming guys, 99%, in fact, I don't know of any project now, all these NFT projects are storing the stuff in Google Cloud and Amazon Cloud. So Moxie's, you should read it. If you're not, just do a Moxie Marlin Spike Web 3.0. And it's funny because we all have been saying it, but that dude is famous, so he got all the press, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. But he's smart, and he talked about these things, which is exactly the same thing. None of us will run nodes. I don't think all of us will go home and start running servers to join these networks. So what is really Web 3.0, right? And the question is, again, it's not tech. It's, in my mind, is giving you the ability to have some mechanism, whether you're paying for it, to monetize your data. So you have to pay some platform to say, hey, I'll pay the platform so I can do all these things, like you pay your lawyers, like you pay your CPAs and chartered accountants who are in the room to prepare your taxes and do all these things. It's still your taxes. They're just helping you prepare it. Having the option to do it. So it's more about participating economy, ownership economy, and what is the technical underlying infrastructure. So blockchain is one element of it. Asset tokenization, another element of it. And all the things we talk about in terms of privacy preservation and technologies that facilitate these other elements are other parts of the whole thing. So all the collection of AM technologies that we talked about in the morning ties into some of the elements of what it is. So there's a business model, there's tech, and there are a bunch of use cases. Questions? Are we good? Challenging? I'm happy to be challenged. It's completely cool.
So this adaptability is still a question, right? Like I understand what Facebook is doing, they might be doing it to transition it into like, it being a discontinuous innovation, there is a change in behavior expected. But then again, given the compliance issues around GDPR and they don't allow you to by default give that option of shifting to access controls.
Yeah.
So if you're asking the user again and again for access control and with all of the decisions being based on data already, you're basically compromising on time of results.
Yeah, so that's a good point you bring up. So GDPR, I'm sure you all know about GDPR. By the way, India has more strict data regulations. Ethiopia has stricter than India the regulations around data. So the question is, if I truly have Web 3.0, is GDPR even a question? So GDPR had this data processor and data handler, like they have actors and roles, they have different, to say if you're processing transactions, then you're a controller, and you have all these different other elements. But GDPR is preventing misuse of our information. And right to be forgotten, which is a European concept, to say I can have the search engines to remove my name from the search history. It's still obfuscation. You have control on the data which you have no access or control on. You're simply requesting a platform to undo it because the law lets you do it. Google can still run all kinds of algorithms on your data. They may not share it because GDPR, but they still have it. So if you have data on yours, does it make all the data regulations and GDPR irrelevant?
But I think there are needs for amendments, like in terms of retracting the data, if you're giving timed access, then there is also restriction by GDPR on data processing.
Yeah, correct.
There is a need in like alteration of these guidelines, but I think we need the guidelines for this.
I agree. So that means that if I give my data to you, I want to make sure you're protecting my information based on the consent that I've given you, not going all crazy with it because I have given you the consent and GDPR still say relevant. I'll take that point. I think that's a fair point that you still need and you can't just go all crazy bad, you still need a transition mechanism that we all can understand what we are getting into and so on and so forth, which almost took us 2 decades to understand the problem we are in today. And 90% of people don't even get it. I mean, a person who's living on the fringes of our society, who's looking at basic living, I don't think they care for data privacy because they have other things to worry about. So how do you make it systemic? Which means Axie Infinity was a perfect example. You all know about Axie Infinity, right? Anybody doesn't know Axie? Okay, that's fine. So Axie Infinity, gaming, you know Axie Infinity?
It's a metaverse.
I'm asking you specifically, do you know Axie Infinity? Oh my, you're a gaming guy. You're supposed to be in all into this. No. So Axie Infinity is during pandemic. So if you've been to, no, it's okay. If you've traveled to Philippines and Vietnam, there's a lot of jobs on Gojek and food delivery systems, and it's Uber, like all this, gig economy as it's called. So during COVID, everything was stopped, and so they said, how do we make money? So, and I'm not a gamer, and I don't claim to be in gaming industry, unlike you do, but I'm not a gamer at all. But I understand the economic system. I understand tokenization system. So I'm looking like, and so I spoke to my son. I'm like, hey, how do you do this? Like, what is this gaming thing? So he sits and explains me the whole thing, and I still don't get it. But the idea is that if you have Pokemon Go, how many of you know Pokemon Go? Yeah. Oh my, so this is generation gap. I still don't know what Pokemon Go is, but you apparently go and catch these virtual characters and you breed them and everything else. So Axie Infinity basically built an economic system, token economics, and this is a good case study. They built an economic system to say, I can build these digital creatures and give them enough power and eventually sell these creatures, and I'll need something called SLP, which is an internal token, and eventually I can take this and sell them for Axies, which I can convert them into Ether. That was the whole model. And that became, today is the highest gaming, 3.8 billion today. And it was basically feeding the entire families of people who had nothing but time. So it was play to earn. People played and bred these little artifacts. I don't know who would pay, but the thing is that the kids in advanced economies didn't have to waste time. They would simply buy a creature with that capability, bring it to theirs, so that's like an NFT, and they would own that creature, which had all these capabilities over time. So that was the model. And the way you would do that is, these things were Axies, you would convert them into Ether, and somebody else would pay Ether to buy this from you. And that's how the market worked. Except that the model is now saying, play to earn will not last. It was COVID thing. You need to be play to win, because play to earn is like just hanging on playing. Why would you get paid for just showing up to work? That's the thesis behind it. So in this case, you had two token economic systems. You had ownership. People had the phones. They were low bandwidth, low connectivity type issues, and they basically built this entire system around what the tokenomics should be to have token economic systems. So people who are in gaming and NFTs, the word metaverse is synonymous with Web 3.0. And the idea there, if you recall the past conversation of the polka dot that you brought up, is you have all these different ecosystems. And gaming today is a walled garden. So if you have Blizzard, or you have any of the, you're a gamer. So what games do you play? Okay, so Call of Duty. You have a gun in the Call of Duty, I guess? Yeah. So the gun has capabilities, so you increase something to over time. Yeah. So your profile, right? Now you can only play in Call of Duty with your artifacts in Call of Duty. You cannot take it to other game. So the idea is if you could convert some of these things to NFTs, can you trade them? Can you take it from Call of Duty to a different ecosystem? And that's what Blizzard has recently signed a few things. A lot of gaming companies actually getting into Metaverse to say if you are in one universe and you're getting into another universe in the gaming context, can that be something that will be beneficial for users? Because for multiplayer games, what's the biggest thing? Yeah, for multiplayer games, you need a community incentive, and identity, all components of a blockchain ecosystem. So the question now becomes, who can tell me what Metaverse is? I'm going to pick on you because you're digital marketing. Both of you guys at the end. Anyone, both of you, it's for the table. What is Metaverse? Give it a guess. We're all friends here now. Okay, that's a start. That's a form factor. Anybody else want to build upon that? Alternate universe?
Yeah, so it's a virtual world using augmented and virtual reality technology.
But aren't this definition of a form factor? I mean, we have all that today. You have a virtual world. You can do AR, VR. Oculus was sold to Facebook just to be able to play games and be virtually present. What makes Metaverse different?
It's the virtual representation of
Your
the
avatar.
Exactly. So the real, you can do transactions and every other thing in the metaverse as well. So suppose activities like lending, going forward, there are different stores that every company is putting up in metaverse. So basically, through metaverse, you'll be able to deal with real world stuff as well.
Okay, I'll take that.
Not just interact with the internet, but be in the internet.
Yeah.
Also,
I like how you think. That's pretty good. Being in the internet. That's good. That's good. Sorry?
basically a complete digital world where we can enter as a character and we can do whatever things that we do in our world for the going forward.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, yes. And I think, to me, the confusion, that, or at least the conversation that we have in the Metaverse world is exactly this conversation. Okay, we can have an avatar, we can be in virtual world, we can have, but I think it's a little bit bigger than that. And I'll give you another example of the only gamer I know, which is my own kid. And he would play games with his friends, and they would go and buy each other sandwiches and everything else. And I'm like, where are you buying this? At the time, he didn't have, now he has access to all financial systems, but back in the day, he didn't have any. We would just give him some pocket money, and he would. But I'm like, where are you getting these sandwiches? Like, what's going on here? So he said, Dad, I had his game points, and I transferred the game point to this guy, and he owed me a sandwich. So he was doing all this in virtual world, but he was basically doing this in real world, real transactions happening. Maybe it's form of a sandwich, but still a thing of value for short term at least. So the way I'm looking at Metaverse is similar to what we are doing now in the space. Besides the modality and the form factors, modality in the sense that you mentioned AR, VR elements. And it's really important for you to understand this, in my opinion, for digital marketing, because most of my conversation, have you heard of WPP? WPP is the biggest sort of ad company, right? Sorry? Okay, then we're not going to talk about them at all. But some of this conversation we've had is, what is it? Are you going to have a logo in this AR, VR and call it a metaverse presence? Or are you going to have ability to have a store? But then at the end of the day, if you're dealing with physical and virtual goods, how do you break those barriers? That if I'm going into a virtual store, which we have today, by the way, you can have avatars, you can go and try your dresses and buy clothes. Yeah, H&M has that. So is that metaverse?
It's like more than that, right? It's an integrated experience.
Yes, that's it.
It's like my H&M is only for one specific thing, right? But as a metaverse, it's for everything, one common place. Then it
Yeah. So no, wouldn't be one common place. It is the ability for you to traverse through multiple universes, at least my definition of it. By the way, neither Web3 or nor Metaverse has any definition. So if you want to make it your own, have enough conviction, like I'm having right now, and people will believe you, right? But all my research has gone into this is around the fact that let's build upon this, right? You have ETH. This is a traditional layer one, which started out before Metaverse even came into existence. And you have sort of Solana, and you have Cardano, and some enterprise stuff that's happening around it. They all have their tokens. Okay? So on Ethereum, you have a DeFi ecosystem. So this one be Aave, Uniswap. Let's say Polygon is actually elements of this. So let's say you have this ecosystem. Bitcoin has Lightning Network and just payments. Solana has an NFT ecosystem. And let's say you have, some of the elements of anybody wants to name a project on NFTs, especially the Metaverse and Web3 questionnaires. Name some NFT projects. Punk. Bored Ape Yacht Club. Punks. Says Axie. What else? And then you have Cardano, which may have one or two for now, right? So these are ecosystem. To the question that we asked earlier, what is a token economic element? You're building an ecosystem, you're building an economic system and everything else. And then you have the good old bank. So if you want to play a game, or you want to own the prized possession of a Bored Ape Yacht Club for a measly price of $9 million, how do you get there? Well, you've got to do a few steps. You need to have an on-ramp, off-ramp through UPI or Plaid. If you know how Plaid provides the integration of banking ecosystem with stuff, and you trust them and you move money around. So you move the physical money into this world. You procure ETH. You buy ETH, and you buy, let's say, directly with ETH or with Matic. And you buy this, and then you buy Axie. Or in case of Bored Ape Yacht Club, you basically go into an exchange. So there's an exchange here that buys these things and move into this and buy. And then you eventually be able to trade this and this. And then you have decentralized exchanges, or you have Polkadots of the world that provides translation, right? So to me, remember, when we started this morning, we compared Ether, Bitcoin, and everything else to nation state status. They all have enough ecosystem, they have enough money, enough capital, and attracting more to build the ecosystem and community. So to me, this represents Metaverse, barring the AR, VR, other experience, because this facilitates the things that you're saying. That if you want a VR is a modality. But if you're in VR in this ecosystem, you may be running around in some universe that's selling shoes. That happens to be in Solana. You don't care, it's in Solana. You have an AR, VR experience. Then you go in there and you buy a shoe, and you need to pay for that shoe somehow, and you have money in your bank. And you don't even care if I have to go through multiple ecosystems. You simply move the money, and some company, and this is what I would focus on in future, some company facilitates this entire process of transacting, moving, and enabling you buying shoes with your VR experience with a blink. That to me is Metaverse. That you are crossing multiple universes, and you're taking meta information from each of the universes and deriving value. And if I can do that for my shoes, I'm giving shoes an example, what can I not do with my own information? Can I not take my own talent and go to this ecosystem and say where my talent is more valued, like we do for our jobs, like we do for our application of other elements. So while it may be a little esoteric to think about that, I think we should look in this term where how do I do it? Second thing is, can someone make this easier like Amazon has made, or Baidu, or any of the marketplaces today have made it easier, that all you do is pick a dress and buy it, and you don't care. And you can even do in India, you can do COD, which means you don't have to pay till it shows up. And even after it shows up, You're giving cash, which means the guy can run away. So how does a company ensure that they get the money's worth or money back? Right? So it's an extension of where we are with Web 2.0 in terms of some of the infrastructure components that deals with it. I'm going to pause here. Make sense? Comments? Challenges? Come on.
Have you discussed decentralization in Web3?
When you left for an hour and a half long break, we did. I'm just kidding. What do you want to talk about? But we can do, look, we are customizing for everyone. So I can go back through it again. But the whole idea is that decentralized is not a summary of the hour and a half long conversation we had on this. I'm just kidding, Shar. Yeah, so the thing is that, and I actually pointed out to you too, and I said, oh, must have gone for lunch. Because we don't think decentralization is the answer, but the thing is that if we are going after 3 fundamental elements of computing, which makes the entire digital world run, what are those three components? Very basic level, at the lowest level of computing. Yeah, in hardware, you have compute, interconnect, and storage. At the very basic level, that's what most systems do. They have a processor, GPU, CPU, ASICs, and specialized processor. They do some processing. They have to connect to other computers to expand, parallelize, scale, decentralize, and all that good stuff. And then you have to store. You're storing state information, storing NFTs, storing images. And so the question is that decentralization decentralizes all of this and more, where then you have technologies like Filecoin, IPFS for storage. In interconnect, you have projects like Brave New Coin, and you have Helium. These are all decentralized projects trying to give you interconnect. And you have, I don't know if you heard of Chia. So these are companies who are trying to decentralize these fundamental elements to say that do you have to, whoever is buying this, somebody has to buy the hardware. And that becomes the business model. That if I'm investing into ASICs or GPUs, then they're tokenizing their infrastructure and letting you design an application based on decentralized storage of files. Like Filecoin, you need to buy a Filecoin. They will take your files, split into multiple pieces, and store them. So that way you don't have the Google storage problem that if you don't pay your bills, your storage is gone. You have the coins, the storage is there. That you own that data because you have paid for it. Not going through some indirect Web 2.0 company that has stopped paying the bills, and next thing you know, your content is missing because you switched the app. This is the example that I was giving earlier. So decentralization is a part of it. Blockchain is one of the technologies that facilitates and enables Web 3.0. And on top of all of this stuff, which means can I do this with centralized infrastructure? Probably yes. But we'll have the same level of resiliency because I'm trying to build the element of global scale. I'm trying to build the element of the fact that I don't want censorship resistance, which means the notion of having centralized entity to control my actions, my behavior, enable, disable, allow, deny, is where things become a bit more real at the infrastructure level. But there are companies like Blockdaemon. Have you heard of Blockdaemon? Blockstream. They are a company that actually last year 40 billion was invested into these. Some of the companies are building data centers in Siberia. Some of them building data centers into, and as mining moved from China to these places, that is your Web 3.0 infrastructure. Into building new data centers, new sort of that goes into it. I'll pause. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
Is that the only benefit of decentralization, I think? I mean, is asset utilization also a component of decentralization? Like what do I mean is basically, if there are 100 participants, not all of them are using their capabilities at the same level, right? So you can decentralize.
Yeah. So I think so that's a good point. You know what we're talking about, guys?
Yeah.
So that's about business model, right? The whole element of virtualization that we did in the last 2 decades. So from OVMs, so OVM status machines and VMware, and now we have containerization. The entire premise of that was shared resource usage, incentive economics, to say it'll be cheaper, like 1 cent a minute for running for an hour or whatever the case is. I think Web 3.0 goes a bit further than that, which means that you're driving not so much as shared resource usage, you're creating commodity and incentives for people to start investing into their infrastructure because we don't want either a single company. Again, Block Daemon does that today. They give you all the decentralized. Like if you want to run a mining nodes, you're not going to go to IBM or Amazon. You're going to go to Block Daemon to run the nodes for you because they have specialized infrastructure, specialized hardware, customized hardware that you can run for yourself. So shared resources, it takes the next level where you're trying to commoditize these elements with a layer of incentive economics to say, if you have Filecoins, and if you're storing your content on my server, or I have IPFS servers, and I'm contributing to IPFS, which is Interplanetary File System, as a storage mechanism, then what am I getting to simply keep those machines up and running? Maybe I'm getting a Filecoin, maybe I'm getting a Bitcoin, and that's my business model. That I have to equate the economics of energy, of running the machines and maintaining it, and how many people are running it, and that becomes, which is essentially the business model of mining companies today, is how many Bitcoins they mine and how much they're able to make in relation to the equation of energy and resource utilization. So I don't think it's shared resource structure. That's like a very Web 2.0 and very cloud-like structures. And I've actually challenged this in the open community to say, I don't think, and that's the reason why I don't see any, with the exception of some startups who are in the POC phase, the real blockchain companies don't run this on their systems on any of the clouds because it's too expensive. Because it's a perfect storm, right? Yeah, all these are technologies that make it easier. But to host it, the shared resource model is too expensive for Web 3.0. The first thing I want to do is pick a use case, which means you got to tell a story. Okay? Second thing you're going to do, so we learned a bunch of things today. We learned about permission, permissionless, what are the elements of that stuff. So you got to pick why blockchain. You got to define as a 2A what is digital asset. Remember tokenomics, few things. What is a digital asset? What tokenomics are what's the asset tokenization element? 3 is I want to have a brief discussion on technical technology choices. Trust me, if you all are aspiring executives, you should get in this engagement, right? It's not just about going all deep in Ethereum and mastering it. These are very complicated choices that you have to make. So this should be a taste of what is yet to come in your careers, right? So pick a use case, answer why blockchain. And this is, again, trade trust, have the fundamental tenets, which means when you're presenting this or when I'm looking at it later on, I need to be able to get a clear vision of why you're doing this. And you can do all the research and everything else that goes with it. What is a digital asset in the system? You can have 1 or 2 or whatever you choose, which will manifest in category number 5. This is defining a tokenomics system. What is the tokenomics of that? What is things of value? Who are the players? How do you attract the ecosystem? Who make money from tokens? Who has to buy tokens to participate? All that is a part of it. Now, even if you do so then you have number 4, technology choices. And then you have to define what we call as a business structure, not a business model, but a business structure. The difference between business model and business structure is business model are sort of you're modeling a business after something and you're changing equation of those models depending on what you want the outcome to be. The business structure is the constant debate between centralization and decentralization. What I'm trying to communicate here is we've talked a lot of stuff today. We've had opinions that we shouldn't be drinking the decentralization Kool-Aid. So my point is, pick a use case, why blockchain, what's digital assets, the tech choices, and this will help us define, you can have a business either way. But if you choose one or the other, hopefully you'll learn the inefficiencies or what you excel when you design a token economic system. It's a real world exercise, and it's hard. And I only want a page and a half or 2 max. It's easy to write 15 pages. It's hard to write 2, which means that you don't have to be, paragraphs and paragraphs of history of, don't care of any of that stuff. We need 5 things, a page and a half or 2. If you make it a page, even better. But maximum 2 pages, nothing more than that. And you can have the headings and define. You can even make pictures if you don't want to go into writing. However you choose to manifest your work, it's up to you. So put some energy into it. Oftentimes you'll realize after coming here, like we picked the wrong use case, and that's okay too. And it's happened with me, like, this is a crappy use case. You can do enough research for the projects, and it'll be great as a bonus criteria if you can cite 1 or 2 projects that tie to the use case. So if you choose trade finance or trade logistics, pick 1 or 2 and say, these are the examples of what I worked on. Only because then that explains that you've at least done some work. And again, not a lot of work. I'm hoping it invokes a lot of conversation and debate, which is the point of this exercise. It's not about how well can you answer a question. It's about how's your thinking going. No right or wrong answer, like I said earlier. Whatever you do, have a conviction behind it. And you cannot have a conviction without the knowledge that goes with it. Otherwise, it'll reflective. So is that okay? Anything you want me to change? We are customizing the coursework, the outcome based on your feedback. Is this okay?
So when do we have to submit?
Yes. So going to be assignment today, an assignment tomorrow. And I want this submitted by 7 p.m. I'm just kidding today. By Friday night, your time. Is that okay? Friday's okay, right? Only because it'll be morning for me in the US on Friday. So give me a chance to review and read and everything else. So it's a good use of time, I think. So is Friday okay? The point is I won't rush it up because deadline without outcome doesn't mean anything. So if you want another week, tell me. If that makes your work better, I'll move it. But we have to do it for all. I cannot keep jumping around for 2 people and 4 people.
We are not presenting it to you then.
It's up to you. If you want present, we'll have to do a web conference. Yeah, let's do that. So we'll schedule a web conference, and you'll get about what I should. You can blame him. So now you all are presenting on a WebEx. No, his idea is stuck. Now you can beat him up later on. It's up to you. I'll let you decide with him. It'll be good because what will happen is you always learn from others. So if you get on a call, let's make it 2 or 3 hour call or whatever, and give about 6 minutes, just like what they do in Silicon Valley, right? When you're raising money. So think of that as a VC funding raise that you're doing. You have 6 minutes, not more than 4 slides. So that's more work. Sorry, you opened your mouth. But let's do this, and I'll have an extension of this tomorrow for what we do tomorrow. So it doesn't look like it's a lot of work, and you can combine those 2 assignments into one 4-slide deck.
So can we make it on Monday so that we can work on weekend also?
How about we make it next Friday? Is that okay? Next Friday? Let's do next Friday. Time is good because now unless you're all last minute ninjas and you skip this and go, and that's your call. It's look, I'm going to go back to my life and I'm going to do what I have to do. It's up to you how much you want to put into this. It's as simple as that. I mean, no one has ever questioned value for money when it comes to education. People are happy to leave early and not do enough work in some cases. But my point is that I'll do this today. Tomorrow's work, I'll extend this. And you of course have to do both in terms of turning it in. A page and a half both, or maximum 2 pages. But when you present it, have a 4-slide max. 5-6 minutes, which means you don't have to be fancy, black and white, bullet points. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, which means least effort. Put more gray cells to work. And the idea is, if there are 10 groups here, 9 groups, 10 groups. So if you put 10 minutes each, then that's 100 minutes. We split into 2, 5. 15 minutes each group. We'll split into 2 sessions. So you may get more time, and we'll do it back to back like they did one day after, and I'll let you figure out what that is. Is that okay? That'll be like a good VC pitching too, like you come an idea, especially you, or people who are getting into this. Firoza, you're brand new out of this. So you never know. You'll bypass the entire employment role and go straight from being a student to a startup founder. That could be possible. So is that okay? Understood? Any questions, concerns, comment, critique? You're good. Okay. So I'll spend 10 more minutes and we call it a day until tomorrow, yeah? So that's essentially where things are. We haven't talked about governance. Governance goes largely into some of the other elements of tokenomics system. So as you're designing tokenomics system, which is the last part of your assignment, you will encounter some facet of governance. So when tokens are issued, when tokens are burned, who gets to have token, all that is a governance structure. In the world enterprise lives, which is consortium-based models, governance is decided by the consortium. It's not token-driven for the most part. But in Web 3.0 world, it has to be defined from the longevity of that work. So there's a decentralized governance, but there's some of the constructs of wallet tokens, DeFi, layer 2, and Web 3.0 sort of encompasses, sits on that. But this is a very crypto-centric model. Right, so this deck we created was very crypto-centric in the context of information, the context of social media, context of pictures, and all that we discussed. Some of these may not rely upon. For example, the notion of wallet is very crypto-centric today. But I would imagine that if you're going with the mechanism of truly Web 3.0 and you're trying to monetize your data, your pictures, your art, your talent, you need some form to get paid somehow, like having a bank account. And if you're getting paid in a digital form, with digital token, with digital assets, then what does that wallet look like? And I go back to it again, that if you're starting out, digital ID is an issue that's not solved. Think of the fact that having a universal ID that's recognized in the entire metaverse. It's a hard problem because we talked about interoperability. We talked about an asset being recognized from one. So if we have a basic challenge of having an asset being recognized from one network to another network. Imagine solving a problem of having one universal ID that's understood by everybody in the ecosystem. So that is what walleting is all about. And that's why I think wallets, I don't know if you follow Kathy Wood, which is ARK, investment, everything else. Conviction is big. Her fund lost 50% of value, and she's still sticking to it. If you look at her report of all the advanced tech, walleting it's not just about having digital wallet like Coinbase or whatever. It's the bigger ecosystem of digital wallets. And as more and more ecosystem is going towards wallet, it's the fastest growing area in the industry. So that's what that is all about. And so walleting entry point, and I don't want to spend more time on this as we discussed, but we start with login user and this is OAuth mechanisms. As you know, we don't keep track of our ID anymore, which makes Google and all these guys, by the way, they're not helping you. They're giving you OAuth token. They know exactly what you signed for, what services you have, what cookies they need to track. They know all of that stuff. So for them, it was a natural extension of that business. And to Shreyas's favorite fox that he's here with Metamask, but this is not, I'm not saying Metamask is Web 3.0. I'm saying this is a glimpse into what Web 3.0 looked like, is both in terms of Trezor and Ledger and your custodial and non-custodial wallets is one avenue, but there's also what's not addressed here as digital ID. So a completely different element, and that needs to be addressed. And even Metamask is only EVM compatible. So you cannot, for people who don't know, EVM is Ethereum virtual machine. And this is only EVM compatible. So non-EVM compatible layer 1 protocols, you can't use MetaMask, which means you need 2 or 3 other wallets. So we talked about fungible, non-fungible tokens. Familiar with ERC standards? Okay. So ERC is Ethereum request for comments, just like NFCs and RFCs that we've had in the past. RFC is request for comment for all the tech companies. So Ethereum as layer 1 went down the path of developing standards by creating an ERC. So you can create a proposal called EIP. Ethereum, I don't know what I stands for. Anybody from here can add to this? EIP. So E is for Ethereum, P is for proposal, improvement proposal. You are close with investment, but it's improvement proposal. Ethereum improvement proposal. And you propose that, and if community accepts it, so the same voting mechanism becomes an ERC standard, then you develop a specification. And that's why, one reason why, my question of why we have such a high growth of crypto companies, one, you have copy and paste. Second thing is you have ERC. You can create a DAO within a matter of like a couple of hours. We can create a complete digital enterprise, whether you're cutting and pasting or simply following because all the heavy lifting is done by the platform beneath it, right? So that's ERC. Fungible, non-fungible tokens, hybrid tokens goes into calculus of your overall economic system that needs to be there. And then you have, again, economical perspective is, this is a complicated topic, and I'm not going to dive into this because we had a reg and comp. So this goes into the regulatory and compliance sort of framework that drives it. So we discussed some of that, USDT, USDC, DAI. So I'll pause here because a lot to cover in this space. And tomorrow we will spend all the time on different types of tokens, different ecosystem players, which means that tomorrow all of the work we will do is with crypto. So come with questions, come with an open mind. Any questions, comments? No questions at all. Either you all are too tired or you're just tired of listening to me. Okay, so tomorrow, 9 o'clock? Yeah. Is that okay? So I have 4 presentations for tomorrow. I'll be happy if I get through one, because that's a long one, which we took almost about 8 months to categorize the entire industry and some standards in terms of different classification of tokens, how they fit in, what you need to be aware of, because I was asked specifically to spend more time on crypto, which we start today after the initial first time. So with that, see you guys tomorrow. Get some time for lunch before the next class. You'll be drained by the time of the whole day. It can be painful. But thanks again, guys. See you tomorrow. Because I'm a crypto guy, I have a DAO. You have to deposit some Ether, and then it gets transferred to your wallet automatically. No, it's not a joke. Yes, it's a joke. Yeah, you can have the DEX, not a problem.